Yes, the humanoid robots, they are arriving in architecture right now. Slowly, they become a reality as, let's say, machines which have different capacities than the previous robots that we've been working with. We've been doing research on architecture and digital fabrication for 20 years. We've worked with many different robots, flying robots, industrial arms, etc. and they work with a lot of materials, new construction principles, working with a broad range of processes. And now what changes is that until now the focus was on the material processes, on sustainable construction. How can this change for architecture? Also about workforce, how can craftsmanship and these machines co-evolve? And now with this advent of the humanoid robot, suddenly there is a shift, because if you look at the humanoid robot, of course, it is very human-alike looking, it has character. So it's much more about the relation between these machines and the humans.
For us, it was not so much about what does the robot dream. We wanted to leave this open to answer for the visitor. What we wanted to do is to put the machine, which is actually still a robot as we know it. So it's an addition of motors that drive the turn axis and so on, into a condition that is superhuman. So that we know, dreaming, sleeping, being in a condition that is not completely awake is a thing that we associate with humans. And by putting this machine laying in the air and sometimes starting to move and making movements that are gentle, very minimal, and then sometimes, more abrupt, we wanted to provoke the thinking about the nature of the dream. At the same time, we all know that when dreaming, the distance between a good and a bad dream, so the nightmare is never that far. This thing can tip over very quickly, and we think this is also the condition we are in regard to these technologies. There is not a clear positive scenario or a clear dystopian scenario. These things merge, and overlap. So the best way for us to understand what is now happening, now that we are transiting from these machines that are clearly machines, to these new kind of machines that are, so close to us that they create empathy with us, is a moment where we have to understand things, in a very deep way, and also to question ourselves.
If you see in our installation, we have this hanging robot. The people are looking at the robot, they're starting to dance, some of them wave. They immediately build a kind of emotional relation to the machine, and that is changing. This will also change the question for architecture. So will these machines start to co-inhabit our space together with humans? These will be questions which will be interesting for architecture to see what are the kind of services, and relations in cohabitation with these humanoid robots.
The relationship between us and the machine or the tool or the technology has always dominated us, because since we learned to build the most simple tools, we established a relationship to these things. Now empathy towards a hammer or a screwdriver, maybe this is an exaggerated thing, but I would argue that if you compare it with what has happened during Industrial Revolution, this 2.5 century when the machine got big and dominated by capital and an enemy, for the worker, and the craft person was turned into a labor, anonymous labor. There's something happened. Something happened, that can or should be reversed. We think the machine we work with now, are of different nature, and there to understand how far we can create a positive relationship to them, to use them, to think about them more as partners in whatever we do, rather than in competitors we have to fight.
We asked the question about the dreaming robot to start opening our imagination. I don't know what they dream, how they hallucinate, but we all know that artificial intelligence hallucinates. It starts to create random answers, partially, not always the logical ones the humans think of, or vice versa. Humans are also not always logical. So in a way, it's a broad question. But we were interested in the kind of tension this creates. You can dream in a very positive sense. If you imagine a robot dreaming a bit about its existence, with architecture or with humans, then maybe it's dreaming about, being of service and, being precise, being helpful, etc. But there's also nightmarish moments. What if this robot would think about malfunctioning, hurting people, etc., which is a bit more the dystopian question that robots bring to us. So we kind of, by humanizing the humanoid robot, we want to kind of open this ambiguous space of reflection.